The French have a phrase, joie de vivre, the joy of living. Alliance Française brings that joy through French language classes, culture, and community straight to you. Classes start May 2nd, but first, try a free Zoom class the week of April 20th. No commitment, no excuses. Early bird pricing ends April 17th. Visit francedc.org and sign up today. Today on CityCast DC, we're talking about another Trump-era controversy at a DC cultural institution. In this case, it's the Holocaust Museum, which last year yanked down content talking about the fragility of democracy and the ties between German Nazism and American Jim Crow. Unlike the blowups at the Kennedy Center, this happened quietly. And according to reporting from Irie Sentner at Politico, that's because the museum didn't even wait for the administration to ask. They just pulled down stuff that they thought might upset the president. So what happened? And what does this mean for other museums in our city? Irie is here to explain. Today is Monday, April 13th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Irie, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So you had a big scoop that focused on some conflicts happening at the Holocaust Museum. What exactly did you report?
So essentially what happened is the Holocaust Museum made two changes to its content. And it did so not at the insistence of the Trump administration, but while the Trump administration had trained its crosshairs on a different museum, the Smithsonian. And basically two people who were at the museum, at the Holocaust Museum at the time, told me that they believed that they changed its content prematurely so as to not draw the attention of the Trump administration.
Look, there's been stories all over Washington of cultural institutions that are either being told to do things differently or who are preemptively complying. But I think for a lot of people, because of the subject matter of the Holocaust Museum, it's a particularly painful thing to see.
Right, exactly. I mean, the Holocaust Museum was established decades ago because its founder said what happened in Germany during the Holocaust should never happen again. Democracy is foundational to what the Holocaust Museum is. And then when the museum, changes the title of a workshop from Fragility of Democracy, and in making that change cites the current environment, that is certainly cause for concern for a lot of people.
So for people who don't know, administratively, what is the Holocaust Museum? Is it part of the Smithsonian? Is it its own thing? And who runs it?
So the Holocaust Museum is not part of the Smithsonian. It is a federal museum, but it's independent of the federal government, and it receives both federal appropriations, but primarily it's actually funded through private donations. The Holocaust Museum's board is mostly appointed by the president. That's really where you started seeing changes made. At the beginning of President Trump's second term last April, he actually removed from the board about a dozen of President Biden's appointees just months into their 5-year terms. That's never happened before. A president has never fired from the board a former president's appointees before their terms were up.
Right. The Holocaust was not necessarily a subject of American political debate. There was pretty much one position that we were against it.
Right. And, the changes that were made really had to do with the connections between the U.S. and the Holocaust. In terms of this website that was taken down, it was a website about the connections between Jim Crow racism and the structures that existed in the Jim Crow South and how they sort of intersected with Nazism and in some ways inspired Nazism. And this sort of coincided with the president's takeover of the Smithsonian, which he said was sort of propagating corrosive ideology that was making American history, look bad.
I don't know if you did any reporting on this, but on the far right, among the sort of intellectual portion of Trump's base, the idea portion of his base, is the idea of studying Jim Crow and connecting Jim Crow to other countries, do they read that as somehow un-American?
I've gotten a lot of feedback after this article went out. And a lot of people who are supporters of the president and his ideology, they're saying, it's a good thing that they took down this website, that the Holocaust Museum really is just about the Holocaust. It has nothing to do with what was happening at America at the same time, and that shouldn't have been the focus.
You mentioned that your sources said that they believe this was done preemptively because they didn't want the museum to wind up in the president's crosshairs. Who was doing the doing? Like, was this the board members getting into the gears, or was it the permanent professional staff?
So it's a bit unclear. I asked the museum why these changes were made, and they did not provide an answer. All they said was that it was not demanded by the Trump administration. In an email that I obtained between a sort of mid-level museum leader and a lower-level staffer, that person said that the name change from Fragility of Democracy had been part of this conversation among museum leadership, essentially, that it wasn't the right time. The website being pulled down, again, I asked the museum spokesperson why that happened, who had done it. I didn't get an answer.
Is there a sense of other stuff at the Holocaust Museum being potentially inflammatory to sort of far-right culture warrior types? Like there is stuff I know about LGBT people in the Holocaust?
I will say there's a lot in the Holocaust Museum that remains up that I would say would probably be inflammatory to the right. I mean, there was an entire America First movement at the same time as the Holocaust, calling for, anti-interventionism. That, a majority of the Holocaust Museum's exhibition on America and the Holocaust is about anti-immigrant sentiment and the fact that, the United States moved extremely slowly and had a great deal of backlash to allowing in immigrants from Europe at the time.
So for the museum, just so people know, where does the money come from? I mean, it's like, who are the donors? That they posted a $52 million increase in assets.
Right. So, I mean, it's everything you can imagine, big and small. I mean, there are thousands of donors, including corporate donors. I will say the reasoning that the museum gave for canceling this program, which was called Civic Learning for Campus Communities. It was a program all about getting college students to engage civically. A museum employee told a number of professors who'd agreed to host this Fragility of Democracy workshop that the reasoning for its cancellation was because of issues with fundraising. That just does not appear to be true. I mean, the museum's net assets surpassed $1 billion last year. Mm-hmm. Again, when I asked the museum about the challenges with fundraising, I did not get a response.
This is Sister Nancy Downing, CEO of St. Anne's Center for Children, Youth, and Families. For over 160 years, St. Anne's has provided children, young mothers, and families across the D.C. area the emotional, educational, financial, and loving support they need to grow in health and happiness. I'd like to invite you to Hope Blossoms, our annual fundraising gala, on May 13th from 6 to 9 p.m. at the Columbia Country Club, 7900 Connecticut Avenue in Chevy Chase, Maryland. It's an evening to celebrate our families and thank everyone whose generosity has made this mission possible. As our Director of Clinical Social Work, Nina Harvey, says, at St. Anne's, we meet women where they are, affirm their dignity, and help them recognize the strength they already carry within themselves. If you'd like to attend Hope Blossoms, volunteer, or support St. Anne's in other ways, please reach out to Ellen Toops at etoups@stanns.org. We would love to see you at Hope Blossoms on May 13th from 6 to 9 p.m. at Columbia Country Club, 7900 Connecticut Avenue in Chevy Chase, Maryland. See you there.
So I have to tell you about my night at Katsumi. Walking in feels like walking into a movie. The lighting and the space and the energy, everything just feels intentional. Like somebody designed the entire thing to make sure that you feel like the main character when you're there. Katsumi on 14th Street is a modern Japanese restaurant led by Michelin-starred chef Masaki Ushino. And the food truly matches the moment. I'm talking about premium sushi that tastes like it was made just for you, a sake program with rare pours you're not going to find anywhere else, and a seasonal menu that feels like it was written specifically for this night. 2025 James Beard semifinalist Andra Johnson is running the dining room, and that means that every single detail feels accounted for from the moment you walk in. Katsumi is the kind of place you are going to want to go back to again and again, especially to bring somebody that you're trying to impress. So reserve your table now at katsumidc.com. That's KATSUMIDC.com.
Spring is here, and it is finally that rare time of year in DC when it's neither too cold nor too hellishly hot to open your windows. So don't miss out. Window Nation's The More You Buy, The More You Save sale is going on now. You could save up to 50% off all windows for your home. Window Nation's installation crews finish the job in 1 day or less, so you can enjoy the breeze with minimal disruption. Best of all, they offer a lifetime warranty on all their windows, so you can relax knowing your home is protected far into the future. Hurry! This sale ends soon. Schedule a fast free consultation now at windownation.com. So this all happened quietly. The stuff about the Smithsonian, Trump did that out in public. He issued a executive order about whatever the term is, anti-American ideologies. The stuff at other museums, there's been great dissent and leaks from within at the Kennedy Center. In this case, it all happened quietly and sort of wasn't shared with the world until you found out about it like a year later. To what do you attribute that?
I think that the people at the Holocaust Museum saw what was happening at its peer institutions in Washington and didn't want anything to do with it, right? The Smithsonian came under so much fire that the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, is now leading a review of this quote-unquote corrosive ideology. Trump ousted the director of the National Gallery of Art. He said that she was a highly partisan person who was a big fan of DEI, right? So I think what happened was that the folks at the Holocaust Museum saw that this was happening. They saw, specific places where their content looked very similar to the content that the administration was going after, and they decided to preemptively fix it so as to not come under fire from the Trump administration. And that's really what my sources told me the issue was, right? This was preemptive, and that's backed up by what the spokesperson told me, which is that, again, the Trump administration did not order any of these changes because it didn't have to.
For years, we've known that there's conservative ideologues who believe the Smithsonian presents a vision of America that they don't agree with, who are critical of universities and institutions of high culture. I have never heard before of the Holocaust Museum being a subject of controversy on the right. Maybe I missed something, but has it been in the past, accused of the same stuff that sort of other museums are?
It's my understanding that it hasn't. I think, one part of it is that, as you said earlier in this conversation, it's just pretty unambiguous, right? There aren't sides to the Holocaust. Everybody acknowledges that it was a tragedy. And I think it's something that people usually tread carefully on. At the same time, though, as I said before, some of those critics have come out of the word work after this article's publication and have said, I do have a problem with the fact that we were talking about the Jim Crow South that did not have a place in the museum or on its website.
And one of the reads of a lot of the Trump versus high culture institutions clashes has been that a lot of these institutions brought in programming after 2020 that reacted to the national reckoning we were having in ways that inflamed the far right and that made some people think this is kind of, you're going beyond your brief. Is there a sense that the stuff he has that was pulled at the Holocaust Museum was relatively new, kind of post-2020 sort of programming?
Right. So the civic education program was started being developed in 2020 and first piloted in 2024, right as the president was like winning the election and then getting ready for his presidency. And it was canceled shortly after he took office, right? And so that sort of was the entire Biden era trajectory. I should emphasize that there's nothing in that Fragility of Democracy workshop that touches at all on present day. It's all about Germany from 1933 to 1945. But my sources told me that they thought that there was concern that the students who are engaging with this material would sort of make that connection to, democratic backsliding in Germany. One of the main questions in that course was what would cause, quote unquote, normal Germans to elect a radical right-wing party to power. It seemed to me that there was concern at the museum that students would make that connection.
Well, that seems like a really basic question of Holocaust studies. But how did Germany, a rich, sophisticated country, do this thing that turned its society into monsters? What did your sources think of the idea that that basic question was suddenly too hot for their own institution?
I'll say that neither of those sources still work at the museum.
And they left because of this?
They left because of the changes, or at least in part because of the changes that they saw.
And in general, has there been a lot of turnover there since Trump replaced the board and came back to power?
It's my understanding that there hasn't been a great degree of turnover at the museum. People there really don't want to talk about it, don't want to make any connection to Trump. It seems like there's, a lot of self-preservation happening, and that's fair. Again, just looking at what has happened at the other peer institutions that the Holocaust Museum has in DC, looking at the Kennedy Center, looking at the Smithsonian, it's a realist choice to make.
So before I let you go, let's look at those other institutions in DC. Is there anything that you found in your reporting about the Holocaust Museum that might give us a sense of what may go down with other institutions of culture in Washington?
In the ways that Trump has actually taken control of the Holocaust Museum, I think that's been, very similar to the way that he took over control of, say, the Kennedy Center. He did replace several members of the Holocaust Museum's board with his own loyalists. I mean, one of them was one of the spokespeople at the RNC. I would say hardly a Holocaust specialist.
There was a former Real Housewife.
Right. And he replaced the chair of that board, Stuart Eisenstadt, who was actually part of the commission under Jimmy Carter that ideated the museum in the first place. He replaced Dr. Eisenstadt with this guy named Jeff Miller, who is, one of the biggest Republican lobbyists in Washington. He was one of the finance chairs for Trump's inauguration, right? So as close of an ally as you can get. We saw something similar happen with the Kennedy Center board. He basically stacked it with loyalists who then allowed him to push through his priorities, including renaming it the Donald J. Trump John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, and then, shutting it down for 2 years.
I mean, the difference between the Holocaust Museum takeover and the Kennedy Center one is that after the new board was put in and the establishment Democrat types were pushed out, at the Kennedy Center, there was an immediate and fairly radical change in programming and branding. There has not been a similar change at the Holocaust Museum. Do you foresee one?
I can't say that my reporting has led me to believe that there will be, some sort of significant content review. Again, I think that these small changes that were really made to avoid something like that happening.
Right. One of the things that gave me real pause reading your story was, I had been going forward with what I guess is a naive assumption that preemptive, in any institution that's big enough to be a little bit bureaucratic, there's a lot of people around. And preemptive capitulation, killing web pages, canceling things because you're afraid of making someone angry. There's enough people in there that they're going to ring the bell. They're going to leak it. They're going to tell people, which obviously happened here through your reporting. But it didn't happen very loudly or very quickly. And I was surprised about that. For people who want to watchdog these kinds of institutions, what should that tell us about the culture within and how we can find out stuff they don't want us to find out?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that a lot of people at the museum, from the lowest levels to the highest levels, were scared, right? Nobody's really in museums for the money, especially at somewhere like the Holocaust Museum. I think, everyone that I spoke to who works there is there because they believe in the mission and ensuring that something like the Holocaust never happens again, and ensuring that, there's this place where anyone in America can come and learn about that history. And I think that there was just really concern with withdrawing any negative attention whatsoever.
Irie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. And become a CityCast DC member. You can do that at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.